"She can't stay here?" someone muttered as the baby's screams shattered the room. Glasses rattled. Chairs shifted. The billionaire clenched his jaw helpless while his wife fought tears she refused to let fall. Then the waitress stepped forward. No apology. No menu. Just a whisper, ancient, deliberate, pressed gently into the baby's ear. The crying stopped mid-breath. Silence crashed down harder than the screams ever had. What no one noticed was the calligraphy stitched into the baby's blanket, or the way the waitress's hands trembled like she was holding history itself. They thought this was luck. They had no idea whose voice she was carrying or what it was about to awaken. The silence that fell over Meridian, one of Manhattan's most prestigious fine dining establishments, was almost unbearable. The elegant clink of silverware ceased. Conversations halted mid-sentence, and even the soft jazz music seemed to fade into the background. All eyes turned toward the corner booth, where a beautifully dressed couple sat with a screaming infant, their faces etched with exhaustion and embarrassment. The baby's cries had been piercing the refined atmosphere for nearly 2 hours, and nothing seemed to help. No one dared to complain directly, but the uncomfortable glances spoke volumes. Then a young waitress with kind eyes approached their table. She leaned close to the distressed infant and whispered something so soft, so ancient, that only the baby seemed to hear. Within seconds, the crying stopped. The baby's tear-stained face transformed into the sweetest smile anyone had ever seen. In that single moment, everything changed. Sarah Mitchell had never imagined her life would become a viral sensation. She was 26, juggling her waitressing job at Meridian with online college courses, trying to build a better future while honoring the heritage her grandmother had instilled in her. Sarah's maternal grandmother, Amamira, had been a Bedouin woman who immigrated to the United States in the 1970s, bringing with her centuries of desert wisdom, ancient lullabies, and a deep connection to traditions that predated modern civilization. Though Sarah's father was American, and she'd grown up in Brooklyn, her grandmother had made sure she understood her roots. Every summer of Sarah's childhood had been spent listening to her grandmother's stories, learning phrases in Arabic and absorbing the rhythms of ancient songs that Bedouin mothers had sung to their children for generations. Amira had passed away 3 years ago, but her voice still echoed in Sarah's heart, especially the way she'd sing Habibi Ruhi, with a particular cadence that seemed to carry the warmth of desert winds and the vastness of starlit skies. When Sarah was offered a position at Meridian, an upscale restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, known for its Mediterranean fusion cuisine and clientele that included celebrities, politicians, and business mogul, she'd been thrilled. The pay was excellent, the tips even better, and the environment was worlds away from the diner where she'd worked through high school. Meridian occupied the ground floor of a historic building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over white cloth tables, and an atmosphere of refined elegance that demanded perfection from every staff member. The restaurant was known for attracting high-profile guests who valued discretion and exceptional service. Head chef Marcus Luron had trained in France and Lebanon, creating a menu that bridged cultures. Rumors swirled that everyone from Hollywood A-listers to tech billionaires had dined there, always leaving impressed. The pressure on the staff was immense, but Sarah thrived in the environment. She loved the challenge of providing impeccable service, the satisfaction of remembering regular customers' preferences, and the artistry of presenting each dish as if it were a masterpiece. Sarah had worked at Meridian for 8 months, earning respect from her colleagues and praise from management. She arrived early for every shift, studied the menu religiously, and treated every guest with genuine warmth. Her grandmother's teachings about hospitality, about treating strangers as honored guests, infused everything she did. She saw her work not just as a job, but as a continuation of the Bedouin tradition of generosity and care for travelers. Outside of work, Sarah's life was modest. She shared a small apartment in Queens with 2 roommates, spent her free time studying business management online, and video called her mother every Sunday. Her mother, who'd married Sarah's American father against her own family's initial wishes, had always encouraged Sarah to embrace both sides of her heritage. That Saturday evening, when Sarah arrived for her shift, she had no idea that her grandmother's ancient wisdom was about to change her life forever. It was supposed to be a perfect evening. The reservation book showed a full house with what the maître described as distinguished clientèle filling every table. This typically meant corporate executives celebrating deals, society couples marking anniversaries, or perhaps a celebrity seeking refuge from the paparazzi. The entire staff moved with practiced precision, anticipating needs before they were voiced, ensuring that Meridian lived up to its reputation as one of New York's finest dining experiences. That was the night Rashid Al-Mansouri walked through Meridian's doors with his young family. Known in business circles as a brilliant entrepreneur who'd built his fortune in sustainable technology and real estate development, Rashid had made headlines for his innovative approaches to green building and his philanthropic work-funding education initiatives across the Middle East and United States. At 34, he'd already been featured in Forbes Business Insider and the Wall Street Journal. His company Al-Mansouri Innovations held patents on solar technology that governments and corporations worldwide sought to license. Despite his wealth and influence, Rashid maintained a relatively low profile compared to other billionaires. He rarely granted interviews, preferring to let his work speak for itself. When he did appear in public, it was usually at charity galas or industry conferences. The media had always been fascinated by his marriage to Layla, a prominent architect who designed award-winning sustainable housing projects. Together, they represented a modern power couple who used their resources to make meaningful change. But tonight wasn't about business or publicity. Tonight was personal, intimate special. Rashid had reserved a private corner booth at Meridian to celebrate his wife's 30th birthday, their first major occasion since the birth of their daughter, Amara, 3 months earlier. The reservation had been made weeks in advance through their personal assistant with specific requests for privacy and a quiet table away from the main dining area. Layla Al-Mansouri was radiant as she entered the restaurant wearing a flowing emerald dress that complemented her dark hair and warm brown eyes. She carried little Amara in her arms, the baby bundled in a soft pink blanket embroidered with delicate patterns. Rashid followed, one hand gently resting on his wife's back, his tall frame impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Behind them, their security detail, 2 discreet bodyguards positioned themselves at a nearby table, trying to blend into the background despite their obvious presence. Sarah wasn't originally assigned to their section. That honor had gone to James Meridian's most experienced server, who specialized in handling VIP guests. But Sarah watched from her own section as the young family settled into their booth, noticing how Illa gently rocked the baby, how Rashid's face softened whenever he looked at his daughter, how they seemed both excited for this rare evening out, and slightly anxious about bringing such a young infant to a fine dining establishment. The evening began smoothly. James delivered menus with his characteristic polish-offered wine selections that Illa politely declined since she was still nursing, and recommended sparkling water from a specific Italian spring that the chef favored. Rashid seemed pleased. Illa was smiling, and baby Amara slept peacefully in her mother's arms, undisturbed by the ambient restaurant noise. Sarah continued serving her own tables. A retired judge celebrating his grandson's law school acceptance. A group of art collectors discussing an upcoming auction. A young couple on what appeared to be a first date. She moved between them with practiced grace, ensuring water glasses stayed full courses, arrived at perfect intervals, and every guest felt attended to without being hovered over. Then, approximately 45 minutes into the Al-Mansouri family's dinner, everything changed. Baby Amara woke up and immediately began to cry. Not the soft fussing of a mildly uncomfortable infant, but the piercing, inconsolable wailing that signals genuine distress. Illa immediately shifted into mother mode, adjusting the baby's position, checking her diaper offering to nurse. But Amara refused everything, her tiny face scrunched in apparent agony, her cries growing louder and more desperate with each passing minute. The restaurant's atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had been an evening of refined elegance transformed into an uncomfortable tension that rippled outward from the Al-Mansouri's booth like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Diners exchanged uncertain glances, and the soft jazz ensemble seemed to play more tentatively, as if trying to compete with the baby's escalating cries. Ila's face flushed with embarrassment and concern as she tried everything she could think of. She rocked Amara gently, then more vigorously. She walked with the baby around their booth, swaying in the rhythmic motion that had always soothed her daughter during previous fussy episodes. She checked the baby's temperature with the back of her hand, searched for any visible signs of discomfort, and whispered soothing words in both English and Arabic. Nothing worked. Rashid stood beside his wife, his usual confident demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. He'd negotiated million-dollar deals with unwavering composure, presented to boards of directors without breaking a sweat. But watching his daughter in distress while unable to help left him feeling utterly powerless. He suggested they take Amara outside for fresh air, but Ila worried that the cold November wind might make things worse. He offered to call their pediatrician, but Ila reminded him that Dr. Peterson was at a conference in Boston. James, their server, approached with practiced diplomatic concern. "Is there anything I can bring that might help?" he asked quietly. "Perhaps some warm milk, or we could adjust the temperature in your section." Ila shook her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Thank you, but I don't think it's anything environmental. She's been healthy. No fever, no signs of illness. I don't understand what's wrong." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The crying continued, unabated, piercing, and relentless. Amara's tiny face was red, her little fists clenched, her body rigid with whatever distress consumed her. Other guests were trying to be polite, but the discomfort in the dining room was palpable. An older couple at a nearby table paid their check early and left. A businessman asked to be moved to a table on the opposite side of the restaurant. The maître Victor, a dignified man in his 50s who prided himself on handling any situation with grace, found himself at a loss. He couldn't ask them to leave. That would be unconscionable, especially given who they were. But the crying was affecting the entire restaurant's experience. He approached their table with as much tact as he could muster. "Mr. and Mrs. Al-Mansouri," he began gently, "is there anything at all we can do to assist? Would you prefer a private room? We have a small event space that's empty this evening." Rashid looked at his wife silently, asking the question with his eyes. Ila nodded, defeated and exhausted. "That might be best," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. This has never happened before. She's usually such a calm baby." As Victor began to arrange the move, Sarah watched from her section, her heart breaking for the young family. She'd been observing the situation for the past 30 minutes, remembering her own niece going through a colicky phase last year, remembering the helpless feeling her sister had described. But something about this situation felt different to Sarah, resonated with her in a way she couldn't quite explain. She saw Ila's tears, noticed the traditional Arabic calligraphy on the baby's blanket, observed the delicate gold bracelet on the infant's wrist that looked like it might have been a family heirloom. Details clicked together in Sarah's mind. This was an Arab family, likely with deep cultural roots, celebrating what should have been a joyful occasion, now overwhelmed by their daughter's inexplicable distress. Sarah thought of her grandmother. Amira remembered the countless times she'd witnessed her soothe crying children at family gatherings or community events. Amira had possessed an almost magical ability to calm distressed infants, using ancient words and rhythms passed down through generations of Bedouin mothers. Sarah had learned some of these phrases, though she'd rarely had occasion to use them. Before she could second-guess herself, before rational thought could override instinct, Sarah set down her serving tray and walked toward James. "Would you mind if I tried something?" she asked quietly. James looked at Sarah with surprise. In the hierarchy of fine dining service, stepping into another server's section was generally frowned upon, especially with VIP guests. But something in Sarah's eyes, a quiet confidence mixed with genuine compassion, made him hesitate rather than immediately refuse. "What did you have in mind?" he asked cautiously. Sarah chose her words carefully. My grandmother was Bedouin. She raised me with traditional methods for calming babies. I've seen situations like this before in my family. I might be able to help, but only if the parents are comfortable with it. James glanced back at the Al-Mansouri booth, where Illa was now crying along with her daughter, and Rashid looked like a man watching his world fall apart. "Let me ask them," he said finally. He approached the table and spoke quietly to Rashid, who listened with an expression that shifted from skepticism to desperate hope. After a brief exchange, Rashid nodded and James gestured for Sarah to approach. Sarah's heart pounded as she walked toward the booth. She'd never done anything like this before, never inserted herself into a guest's personal crisis, never claimed to have answers when trained parents clearly didn't. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, the same voice that had sung her to sleep countless times, that had taught her. The old ways were not superstition, but wisdom refined over centuries. As she reached the table, Sarah took in the scene more closely. Illa's mascara had run, leaving dark trails down her cheeks. Rashid's expensive suit jacket was rumpled from holding the baby. Little Amara's cries had taken on a hoarse quality, as if she'd exhausted herself, but couldn't stop. The baby's tiny face was flushed, her mouth open in continuous wails that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. "Mr. and Mrs. Al-Mansouri." Sarah began softly, her voice somehow cutting through the crying. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. My grandmother was from a Bedouin tribe in Jordan. She taught me traditional methods for soothing infants. I've watched her calm dozens of babies who were crying like this. Would you allow me to try?" Illa looked up at her eyes, red and desperate. "Please," she whispered. "Please, anything. I don't know what's wrong with her. She's been checked by doctors. She's healthy, but nothing we do helps when she gets like this." Rashid studied Sarah intently for a moment, perhaps assessing whether to trust this stranger with his precious daughter. Then he nodded slowly. "What would you do?" "With your permission, I'd like to hold her for just a moment," Sarah said. "There's a specific phrase, a traditional Bedouin term of endearment that my grandmother used. It's not just the words, but the way they're spoken, the rhythm and tone that have been passed down for generations. It worked for her every time. I can't promise it will work now, but I'd like to try." Isla didn't hesitate. She stood and carefully transferred the crying baby into Sarah's arms. The moment Sarah felt Amara's small, warm weight, something shifted inside her. It was as if her grandmother's spirit flowed through her, guiding her movements, informing her instincts. Sarah adjusted her hold, positioning Amara close to her chest, supporting the baby's head in the crook of her arm. She began to sway gently, a motion that wasn't quite rocking, but rather a subtle rhythmic movement that mimicked the gait of walking across desert sands. Her grandmother had once explained that Bedouin mothers learned this sway from carrying children while traveling, a motion that evoked security and ancient memory. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Even the jazz ensemble had stopped playing, sensing that something significant was happening. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, reaching back through memory to find her grandmother's exact voice, the precise cadence and pronunciation that had made those old words so powerful. Then she leaned close to baby Amara's ear and whispered, her voice low and melodic, carrying the warmth of desert winds and the gentleness of countless generations of mothers. "Habibi Ruki, Habibi Ruki Yanur Elaine." The effect was immediate and astounding. Amara's cries faltered, caught mid-wail, as if someone had pressed a pause button. A tiny body which had been rigid with distress began to relax. Snorts. Her scrunched face slowly smoothed, the red flush fading. Sarah continued the gentle sway, repeating the phrase with the same soft rhythm, the same guttural pronunciation that her grandmother had perfected over decades. "Habibi, Habibi, Yanur Elin." My soul's beloved light of my eye. The words carried weight beyond their literal meaning, embodying centuries of tenderness, of mothers comforting children across vast desert expanses of cultural memory encoded in sound and rhythm. Amara's crying stopped completely. A profound silence filled the restaurant, broken only by the baby's small hiccuping breaths as she recovered from her crying spell. Then, something extraordinary happened. Little Amara's dark eyes, still wet with tears, focused on Sarah's face. The corners of her tiny mouth curved upward. She smiled a genuine, peaceful smile that transformed her entire expression from distressed infant to content, secure child. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Diners who had been pretending not to watch were now openly staring at the remarkable scene. The maître stood frozen, his professional composure momentarily abandoned in favor of pure astonishment. But the most profound reaction came from Illa. She let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, her hand flying to her mouth, tears streamed down her face. But these were different tears. Tears of relief and something else, something deeper. Recognition. That phrase. Illa whispered, her voice breaking. Oh my God, that phrase. Rashid immediately moved to his wife's side, placing a supportive arm around her shoulders while keeping his eyes on his now peaceful daughter. Lila, what is it? Are you okay? Illa shook her head, unable to speak for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. When she finally found her voice, it trembled with the weight of memory. My grandmother, she managed. My grandmother used to sing that to me when I was a child. My Judah, she was Bedouin from the same region in Jordan. She raised me until I was 7 before she passed away. She would hold me exactly like that sway, exactly like that, and whisper those exact words when I couldn't sleep or when I was upset. Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. She looked down at the now peaceful baby in her arms, at Layla's tear-stained face, at Rashid's expression of wonder, and felt the threads of connection weaving together across generations and geography. Habibi Illa continued, her voice steadier now. I haven't heard those words in that way, with that exact pronunciation, in over 20 years. After my grandmother died, no one else in my family sang to me like that. My mother was born in America. She'd lost much of the old ways. I'd almost forgotten how it sounded, but hearing it now, it's like my Judah is here in this room. Rashid's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He was a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated with world leaders. But in this moment, he was simply a father witnessing something sacred. Your grandmother would sing you to sleep every night, he said to Illa, remembering the stories she'd shared during their courtship. You told me once that you felt safest in her arms, that her voice could chase away any fear. Sarah continued to hold Amara, who was now calm and alert, her dark eyes exploring Sarah's face with innocent curiosity. The baby's tiny hand reached up and grasped Sarah's finger, holding on with surprising strength. My grandmother's name was Amira, Sarah said softly. She came from a village near Petra. She always told me that the old words carried power, that they connected us to our ancestors, to the wisdom of mothers who raised children in the harshest environments and kept them safe through love and ancient knowledge. Illa gasped again. My grandmother's name was Amamira too, and she was from near Petra. She looked at Rashid, then back at Sarah. We named our daughter Amara in her honor. It means eternal in Arabic, but it also echoes my grandmother's name. The coincidence felt like more than chance. In that elegant Manhattan restaurant, surrounded by modern luxury and contemporary lives, an ancient connection had surfaced, bridging generations, linking two women named Amir across time and space through a simple phrase whispered to a crying baby. The restaurant remained hushed, as if everyone present understood they were witnessing something profound. Victor the maitre found himself blinking back unexpected tears. It worked in fine dining for 30 years, had seen proposals and celebrations and countless memorable moments. But this was different. This was sacred. Sarah carefully transferred baby Amara back to Illa's arms. As she did, their hands touched, and Illa grasped Sarah's fingers tightly for a moment. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what you've just given us. This isn't just about calming a crying baby. You've given me back a piece of my grandmother, a connection I thought I'd lost forever. Amara settled contentedly against her mother's chest, her tiny hand curled against Illa's collarbone, her eyes already beginning to drift closed. The baby who had been inconsolable for nearly 2 hours was now the picture of peace, breathing softly and evenly. Rashid stood and extended his hand to Sarah. "I don't know how to properly thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've had specialists, sleep consultants, pediatricians, everyone trying to figure out why Amara has these episodes. They told us it was colic, that she'd grow out of it, that we just needed to be patient. But no one could help when it was happening, and you, with just a few words." Sarah shook his hand, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. "My grandmother always said, 'The old knowledge exists for a reason,'" she replied. "That modern life makes us forget the wisdom our ancestors learned over thousands of years. She believed that babies carry genetic memory, that they respond to sounds and rhythms their distant ancestors knew, even if they've never heard them before." Illa looked up at her husband, then at Sarah. "Please, would you sit with us for a moment? I know you're working, but I need to understand this better. I need to know more about your grandmother, about the traditions. My own family lost so much of it when they immigrated. My mother tried to hold on to some customs, but the language, the songs, the specific ways of doing things, they faded with each generation." Sarah glanced at James, who nodded his approval, and at Victor, who made a subtle gesture indicating she should absolutely sit down. She slid into the booth across from Rashid and Illa, feeling simultaneously honored and nervous. "My grandmother came to New York in 1973," Sarah began. "She married my grandfather, who was an American engineer working in Jordan. She used to tell me that leaving the desert was like leaving part of her soul behind. But she brought the important things with her, the songs, the prayers, the ways of caring for children and honoring family. She made sure I learned Arabic at least enough to understand the essential phrases. She taught me the rhythms of the old lullabies, the specific ways to hold a baby, even the importance of certain scents and sounds." Rashid leaned forward, fascinated. "My own family is from the UAE, but we've been urbanized for 3 generations. My father built shopping centers and hotels. We lost much of the Bedouin heritage, though we try to honor it. I funded cultural preservation projects trying to document the traditions before they disappear completely. But it's academic, not lived. What you just did, that was lived knowledge. That's exactly what my grandmother would say." Sarah smiled. "She'd tell me that you can read about tradition in books, but you can't learn the soul of it from pages. It has to be passed down breath to breath, hand to hand, voice to voice." Illa gently stroked Amara's sleeping face. "When I was pregnant, I tried to remember the lullabies my grandmother sang. I could recall the melodies vaguely, but I couldn't remember the words, couldn't capture the exact sound. I mourned that loss. I wanted to give Amara that connection to her heritage, but I didn't know how. I could teach you," Sarah offered impulsively, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. "I mean, if you wanted, I know all the songs my grandmother taught me. I still sing them sometimes to myself to keep her memory alive." Illa's eyes lit up. "Would you really? That would mean everything to me." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah sharing stories of her grandmother while Illa absorbed every detail like someone finding water after crossing a desert. Rashid asked thoughtful questions about Bedouin child-rearing practices, about the traditional ways of building community and caring for the vulnerable. Meanwhile, baby Amara slept peacefully, occasionally making soft, contented sounds that brought smiles to everyone's faces. Eventually, Victor approached discreetly and caught Sarah's eye. She understood immediately. She needed to return to her other tables. She'd been away from her section for over half an hour, and other guests needed attention. "I should get back to work," Sarah said reluctantly. "But please, if you'd like, we could exchange contact information. I'd be honored to share what I know." Illa pulled out her phone with her free hand, careful not to disturb sleeping Amara. "Absolutely. I'll text you my number right now." She paused, then added, "And Sarah, thank you again. You've given us something priceless tonight." As Sarah stood to leave, Rashid also rose. "Before you go, I want to make sure you know that what you did tonight, it won't be forgotten. You didn't just calm a crying baby. You connected my wife to her heritage. You gave my daughter a gift I didn't know how to give her. That matters more than you might realize. Sarah felt tears prick her own eyes but managed to smile. My grandmother would be so happy to know her teachings helped someone. That's all she ever wanted, to pass on the wisdom. She returned to her section, where her tables had been temporarily covered by other staff members. Everyone on the floor knew what had happened. Word had spread through the restaurant like wildfire. The other servers looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Even Marcus, the notoriously stern head chef, gave her an approving nod when she passed by the kitchen. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Sarah. She served her tables with her usual care, but part of her mind kept drifting back to that moment when Amara's cries had stopped, when Illa had recognized her grandmother's phrase, when 3 generations of women had somehow connected across time and culture. When the Al-Mansuri family prepared to leave around 10 Illa stopped by Sarah's section with Amara still sleeping peacefully in her arms. "She hasn't made a sound since you held her," Illa said softly. "It's the longest stretch of calm she's had in weeks." Rashid stood beside his wife, and Sarah noticed he carried a small envelope. "We wanted to thank you properly," he said, offering it to her. Sarah shook her head. "Please, that's not necessary. I didn't do anything that deserves special recognition. It was just something my grandmother taught me." "Exactly," Rashid said gently. "Your grandmother taught you something valuable, and you chose to share it with strangers when you didn't have to. That deserves recognition." He pressed the envelope into her hand. "Please accept this not as payment, but as gratitude." Before Sarah could protest further, Illa leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a traditional gesture of deep appreciation. "We'll be in touch very soon," she promised. "I want Amara to know these songs, these traditions. I want her to grow up with the heritage I almost lost." After they left, Sarah returned to the service station and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. For sharing wisdom that cannot be bought with profound gratitude, Rashid and Layla Al-Mansuri. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the note again. $5,000 was more than she made in 3 months of waitressing. It would cover her tuition for the next semester, help with rent, maybe even allow her to take fewer shifts and focus more on her studies. But more than the money, it was the recognition that her grandmother's legacy had value, that the old ways still mattered in this modern world. James approached as she stood staring at the check. "I heard what you did," he said quietly. "That was really something special, Sarah. I just whispered some old words." She replied, still somewhat dazed. "No," he corrected gently. "You preserved a connection to heritage that this family desperately needed. That's worth more than any amount of money." That night, after her shift ended, Sarah rode the subway back to Queens in a state of quiet disbelief. The check was safely tucked into her purse, but she kept touching it through the fabric, making sure it was real, that the entire evening hadn't been some strange, beautiful dream. Around her, the late-night subway car rattled through tunnels carrying exhausted workers, night shift nurses and students heading home from libraries. She pulled out her phone and found 3 text messages from Illa, sent at different times throughout the evening. The first, sent an hour after they'd left the restaurant, simply said, "Amara is still sleeping peacefully. I keep crying every time I think about tonight. Thank you." The second message, sent around 11:00. "Rashid and I have been talking. Would you be willing to meet with us this week? We have an idea we'd like to discuss with you." The third, most recent message. "I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep without telling you that I played a voice recording I made of you whispering to Amara, and she smiled in her sleep. I'm crying again. This is the connection I've been searching for." Sarah's own eyes filled with tears as she read the messages. She typed a response. "I'm honored that I could help. I'd be happy to meet whenever is convenient for you. My grandmother would be so glad to know her teachings are helping another family." When she finally arrived at her small Queens apartment, her roommates were already asleep. Sarah quietly made herself chamomile tea and sat by the window overlooking the street, watching occasional taxis pass by, thinking about her grandmother. Amamira had passed away 3 years ago, but Sarah still felt her presence constantly. She could hear her grandmother's voice saying, "The old ways survive because they're true, Habibi." Don't let the modern world convince you that new is always better. Tonight had proven that wisdom in the most profound way possible. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mother calling despite the late hour. Sarah answered immediately. "Mama, Sarah Habibi. I just had the strangest feeling that I needed to call you." Her mother's familiar voice came through. "Are you okay? Did something happen?" Sarah laughed softly, not surprised. Her mother had always had uncanny intuition. "Something incredible happened, Mama. I used Teta Amamira's songs tonight. Remember how she used to calm babies with Habibi Ruhi?" Her mother gasped. "You remember that, Sarah. You were so young when she passed. I remember everything she taught me, Mama. Every word, every song, every rhythm. And tonight there was this baby at the restaurant crying for hours. And her mother, she was Arab, like us. And her grandmother was Bedouin, also named Amira, and when I whispered Teta's words, the baby just stopped crying and smiled. Her mother was quiet for a moment and Sarah could hear her sniffling. Your grandmother's smiling down on you right now, her baby. She always said you had the gift that you carried the old knowledge in your bones. I didn't understand what she meant until now. They talked for another hour, Sarah recounting every detail of the evening. Her mother sharing memories of a mirror that Sarah had been too young to witness. By the time they hung up, it was past 2 in the morning, but Sarah felt energized rather than tired. The next morning, Sarah woke to find her phone flooded with notifications. Confused and still groggy, she unlocked the screen and discovered that someone at the restaurant had apparently recorded part of the incident on their phone. The video was grainy shot from several tables away, but it clearly showed Sarah holding baby Amara, the restaurant's hushed atmosphere, and the moment when the baby's crying stopped. The clip had been posted to social media with the caption, "Waitress uses ancient Bedouin wisdom to calm billionaire's crying baby at NYC restaurant faith in humanity restored." It already had over 100,000 views and was being shared rapidly across platforms. Sarah's heart pounded as she scrolled through comments. Most were supportive and moved by the story. This is what real culture and heritage mean. That baby recognized her ancestral language. We need more of this ancient wisdom in our modern world. But there were also skeptics. Probably just coincidence. The baby was probably tired of crying anyway. Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as everything from ancient wisdom meets modern parenting to viral moment shows power of cultural